History is a set of lies that people have agreed upon. Even when I am gone, I shall remain in people's minds the star of their rights. My name will be the war cry of their efforts, the motto of their hopes. Napoleon Bonaparte, Emperor of France. Salutations and welcome back to my channel. My name is Kidology and I make videos about everything and anything to do with modern societies. So today I thought we'd talk about something that of course is going to get you frothing at the mouth. History. A few days ago, I was living my best life when I happened upon a video on that website which shall not be named. I was quite flabbergasted on seeing it, and it took me a while to gather my thoughts, and I decided to make a video about it, mainly because, well, firstly, it went absolutely viral, at least on TikTok. And secondly, because I think what it suggests is not only very topical and very persuasive during these trying modern times, but is also quite dangerous insofar as people are actually very much inclined to believe what is being said. And so I thought we could speak about that and speak about this particular strand of history known as generational history or generational theories of history, specifically this new take on it called the camel on the horizon theory. But just before we get into that, I'd just like to ask you to give this video a thumbs up and to please subscribe if you are not. I am aiming to reach 100K or 100,000, I'm not sure how you say it, subscribers by the end of this year, and I would absolutely be just thrilled if we could do that. That would be a good personal triumph for me. So I would very much appreciate it if you do subscribe, and also if you would leave a comment down below telling me where in the world you are from and whether you are proud of your history. That is the history of where you are from or where you live or where you identify. I'd love to know because I think it is quite relevant to this video and what it is suggesting.
The camels are on the horizon. I don't know if you guys have seen this commentary floating around, but I'm going to read it to you because I think it is significant. The founder of Dubai, Sheikh Rashid,
was asked about the future of his country, and he replied, "My grandfather rode a camel. My father rode a camel. I ride a Mercedes. My son rides a Land Rover. And my grandson is going to ride a Land Rover. But my great-grandson is going to have to ride a camel again. Why is that?" he was asked. His reply was, "Hard times create strong men. Strong men create easy times. Easy times create weak men. Weak men create hard times. Many will not understand it, but you have to raise warriors, not parasites."
add to that the historical reality that all great empires, the Persians, the Trojans, the Greeks, the Romans, the Egyptians, and later the British, all rose and perished within 240 years. They were not conquered by external enemies, they were rotten and destroyed from within. America has reached that 240-year mark, and it is starting to become visible and accelerating. We are past the Mercedes and Land Rover years. The camels are now on the horizon. The greatest generation consisted of 18-year-old kids that stormed the beaches of Normandy. And now, 2 generations later, some kids, some 18-year-olds, want to hide in a safe room when words hurt their feelings. They want free stuff from the government because they think they are entitled to it. The camels are on the horizon for sure. History has a funny way of repeating itself.
So this TikTok is from an account called Officially Mona, and the creator of this TikTok is called Simone. She is originally from South Africa but immigrated to the United States and has been living there ever since. Simone describes herself as a libertarian and is very anti, at least, the government and the way that America is governed today. Very much a skeptic of government interference into the private lives of citizens, that sort of thing. Very much a libertarian through and through. I will agree with Simone that those who do not study history are doomed to repeat it. Unfortunately, considering that it is evident, at least by this TikTok, that she has not studied history, at least not studied it factually, we are definitely doomed to repeat it. This is where the doom truly lies. And this is what is inherently dangerous about such a theory of history. This is not just an individual theory on its own. It is one of many a theory that has been propagated since time immemorial. And these collectively are known as generational theories of history. All generational history is categorically implausible when we look at the facts of history in time and space. However, they are incredibly popular, particularly outside of academia. And this is because its essentialist foundation makes it very difficult to disprove them. Not only at face value is it simple and understandable, but it is also chronological, which is incredibly appealing just mentally for human beings to process such information. These kinds of theories are what you would call historical horoscopes. You can find and construct the prophetic truths that you want from and within them. And it is basically because they are too broad, too vague, and too generalized to disprove that they are then deemed to be inevitably true. It is not only historians who are oftentimes to blame for propagating such theories, especially popular historians, but especially nations and governments, because it really does bolster up a narrative of the nation as being within a particular strand of history towards some light or some salvation, teleologically advancing, and it is a very influential and persuasive nationalistic tactic. And you know what? It isn't a bad thing in and of itself when it is used in patriotic ways, when there are particular national holidays, remembrance days, celebrations of particular national figures who had a substantial impact on a country and its legacy. But there is a fine line between the kind of harmless generational historicization and what it means when such theories are not only taken seriously but are seen as more integral than the historical facts which actually initially informed them. And this is what this TikTok represents. And it is quite mortifying when you actually look at the facts of the matter.
Every generation belongs to one of four life cycle types that seems to repeat in the same order over time. The appearance of young war heroes is almost always followed by the appearance of a young generation that appears indecisive and conformist to others. The appearance in history of passionate young moralists is always followed by a generation which appears wild and uneducated.
I had never heard of the camel on the horizon theory, and because of that, I was very intrigued and did a lot of research. The most well-known generational history theory out there, really, and one that I do know of, is called the Strauss-Howe generational theory. The theory was advanced and made mainstream by authors Neil Howe and William Strauss. Howe is currently the president and director of Cyculum Research and Life Course Associates, a company which he founded with Strauss, which applies generational theory in consulting companies. The theory basically holds that American history, and therefore as a consequence world history, is in a continual cycle. Particular generational personas recur and repeat themselves within this cycle, and these personas are called archetypes. Examples of archetypes would be what we know as now millennials. That term was actually coined by these two authors, Gen Z, Gen X, etc. Each archetype gives rise to a new era, that is, to a new turning, as the authors call it. And a turning essentially means that every 2 or so decades, a new social, political, and economic zeitgeist is unleashed. And these turnings are the smaller changes which build up over time into a larger or large-scale change, known as a cyclum or a long history. Following every long history, every generation, a crisis will occur, devastating the status quo. This crisis will result in a low period, which eventually will be followed by a high period. Their generational archetype will inevitably challenge and weaken the institutions and values of the preceding generation. And this new generation will inevitably pursue individualistic values and strive for autonomy. This is similar to how a child will eventually break away from their parents and their value system, allegedly. This then leads to another crisis, and the cycle continues. There is a low point, and then inevitably it is succeeded by a high point. According to the Strauss-Howe generational theory, we are currently in what would be considered the awakening, likely emerging and converging with the unraveling. That is the second and third phases of a turning. In the awakening, as is described in this TikTok, institutions are looked at with skepticism and are attacked in pursuit of individual and spiritual autonomy. The unraveling occurs when these sentiments of personal autonomy and individualism are so strong and omnipresent that institutions are no longer trusted. They are weak and neglected. Unravelings come after awakenings, when society wants to atomize and enjoy. It was actually Strauss and Howe who coined the term millennial back in the 90s. They did this when they described generations in history in their book Millennials Rising. And their description of millennials reads as follows. This generation first arrived amid babies on board signs, when abortion and divorce rates ebbed. The popular culture recast babies as special, and hands-off parental styles were replaced by Lamar's and attachment parenting obsessiveness. Child abuse and child safety became hot topics, while books teaching virtues, values, and team-playing citizenship became bestsellers. As millennials began reaching their teens in the late 1990s, youth volunteering and community service surged, while teen rates of drinking, smoking, and violent crime declined steeply. As they began entering the workforce in the early 2000s, cutting-edge employers implemented safety, feedback, mentorship, and career advancement programs in order to retain their best and brightest. Today, even as they live with or near their parents, first-wave millennials maintain high hopes for their future in the face of record-high youth unemployment. So in their book Millennials Rising, they characterized millennials as being special, confident, sheltered, team-oriented, conventional, pressured, and achieving. Now, all of these findings are based on nothing but anecdotal findings from roughly 600 senior high schoolers whom these authors interviewed. Their entire research pool on the matter was from a high school in Fairfax, Virginia, not exactly representative of millennials and high schoolers the world around. Now, I only focus on millennials because the original poster of this TikTok, Simone, is a millennial. And in Millennials Rising, Howe and Strauss describe millennials as the special generation. The appeal of these theories is that they provide a hopeful lens for the future and also provide an explanation for what is always considered the not-so-good present. The authors made a lot of assumptions based on a very small and underrepresentative pool of students from Virginia. In terms of non-academic, popular and mainstream reviews of the book, it was very positive because, what parent doesn't want to hear that their child is special? The persuasiveness is the key here. Every parent wants to know that their child is not only special, but also, as the theory purports, has a bright future ahead of them. Now, I'd like to explicitly break down this post because it is very interesting, not just insofar as we break it down, but also insofar as what this breakdown then shows this post to actually represent. On a Facebook page called One Word to the World, a post was made on April 10th, 2021. The post showing on screen right now is word for word what Simone says in the opening of her TikTok post. I don't even know what you call those actually right now. I think just a TikTok. The image is of the current ruler of Dubai, Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum. The quote, however, is attributed to the founder of Dubai, namely his father, the so-called founder of modern-day Dubai, Sheikh Rashid bin Saud Al Maktoum. Now, I won't get all nitty-picky about Dubai being founded or not. It is a complex history, but I think we get the point, and I'm not going to be too harsh on that. The founder of Dubai, Sheikh Rashid, was asked about the future of his country, and he replied, "My grandfather rode a camel. My father rode a camel. I ride a Mercedes. My son rides a Land Rover, and my grandson is going to ride a Land Rover. But my great-grandson, he is going to have to ride a camel again." Now, I had to dig deep to try and find who said this, when it was said, the context in which it was said, and I think finally I got to the bottom of it. Graham Wilson has written many books about the Middle East and is currently a contracts and negotiations advisor in Dubai and has been doing this for about 5 years now. His LinkedIn page says that he has been based in the United Arab Emirates, specifically in Dubai, for the last 27 years. He also wrote a biography about the late Sheikh Rashid, and he was able to confirm with fact check that the Sheikh had in fact said this camel anecdote. Further confirmation to Wilson was made by the late Sheikh's son, Sheikh Hamdan bin Rashid Al Maktoum. This was first relayed to me by Sheikh Hamdan bin Rashid Al Maktoum in about 1988, and many years later I heard the same thing from George Chapman, who was Sheikh Rashid's shipping advisor. Wilson said to fact checker in an email. What Sheikh Hamdan told Wilson was that his father said it in the context of wanting to ensure that modern-day Dubai avoided going back to the camel. This anecdote was not relayed in an interview, as is claimed, but was relayed to his advisory committee, the Camelot Majlis. The context surrounding the camel anecdote is a push by the Sheikh to diversify Dubai's economy. The United Arab Emirates is one of the world's largest oil producers. However, the vast majority of that oil is located in Abu Dhabi, not in Dubai, and therefore the Sheikh was trying to induce his advisory meetings and committees to diversify the economy in order to avoid going back in time. Diversification equated to greater prosperity in the future, avoiding going back to the dark ages, if we can put it in so many words. The last part of this quote about grandparents and grandsons, Mercedes and Land Rovers, is actually not attributed to the late Sheikh, but instead is allegedly associated with something said by a Saudi Arabian politician. According to Oxford Essential Quotations, the quote about grandparents and camels can be attributed to the late Saudi Arabian politician Sheikh Ahmed Zaki Yamani as early as 1986. Hard times create strong men create good times create weak men, and weak men create hard times. Now, this quote is in no way attributed to the Sheikh. He did not say this at all, ever. Instead, word for word, it comes from a 2016 science fiction novel called Those Who Remain, a post-apocalyptic novel. The book is the 7th volume in a saga written by the science fiction writer G. Michael Hopf. And the full quote on page 20 of this novel reads, "I've lived a long time and seen a lot of shit," said Gordon, one of the characters. In my latter years, I've become somewhat of a philosopher, and this is one truth that is indisputable. Hard times create strong men. Strong men create good times. Good times create weak men, and weak men create hard times. It was only in 2021 that this quote began to be linked to the Sheikh and not to Hopf. So in terms of this line, many will not understand it, but you have to raise warriors, not parasites. The quote of warriors and not parasites is again in no way associated with the late Sheikh or his son. There's no evidence that either of them have ever said this in public. This connection only emerged in 2021 on social media, and in no way before that. This is the part of the TikTok that I am most interested in grappling with, because I think that it is quite worrying when so overwhelmingly people subscribe to what Simone is saying here. Add to that the historical reality that all great empires, the Persians, the Trojans, the Greeks, the Romans, the Egyptians, and later the British, all rose and perished within 240 years. Now, I'm no historian, and I really need to emphasize this because I'm sure that there are a lot of history students and history enthusiasts and even, fingers crossed, history academics and professors who may be potentially watching this video. So do bear with me. However, based on what I have learnt and have read in books and even in novels, I can say that this makes absolutely no sense at all. The Roman Empire lasted for over 1,000 years. The Western Roman Empire fell 1,000 years before the sack of the Eastern Roman Empire. Personally, I have never heard of ancient Egypt being described as the Egyptian Empire. I'm not sure if maybe our modern definition of empire has changed or morphed over time, but I would not call it that, and I doubt any historian would either. The lengthy history of ancient Egypt is divided by historians into three lengthy periods: the Old Kingdom, the Middle Kingdom, and the New Kingdom. And essentially, Egyptian hegemony lasted for over 3,000 years. In a nutshell, for basically 30 centuries. However, if Simone is talking about Ptolemaic Egypt under, at the beginning, Ptolemy I, who was a general under Alexander the Great, up to the rule of Cleopatra or Queen Cleopatra, then this period of ancient Egypt lasted 300 years, so not 240 years either. I'm sorry, I really don't know all of this terribly well, but just in terms of dates and the length of time and things that I have read, this is what I very crudely gathered, and I did check this on Google before. Whilst editing this, I will be checking. The British Empire lasted from the 16th century to the 20th century. It lasted, therefore, for over 400 years. The classical period of ancient Greece lasted for 350 years. The only empire which comes even remotely close to Simone's declaration of the life and death of empires is the Persian Empire, which lasted for 200 years. Now, I think this is important because factually it completely destroys this generational theory, this idea that all empires have lived and died within the span of 240 years. None of the empires which she gave as examples in any way correspond or confirm this. They were not conquered by external enemies. They were rotten and destroyed from within. There are an amalgamation of very historically specific reasons why empires rise and fall. However, if we are going to talk generally in this sense, we could say that civilizations throughout history have fallen because either they have expanded to such an extent that the empire or the civilization becomes unmanageable, sort of like a bubble that is going to eventually burst. But of course, depending on the empire, depending on the context and the time in history, some bubbles burst before others do. The overriding theory in explaining the sack of the Western Roman Empire is a string of military losses sustained against outside forces, who over the years had become stronger and more savvy. Persia was conquered by Alexander the Great, who took advantage of its declining reign. The British Empire collapsed, not from within, but because it had too many colonies. It was weak after fighting two major world wars, and national self-determination was inevitable after the US became the world's global superpower. Decolonization was inevitable at this point, and largely due to outside forces and pressure that a declining empire could no longer respond to. Before the Second World War, Britain had been violently suppressing anti-colonial resistance and movements for decades. And it was only after the war, again another example of an outside force, that Britain was too weak to put up any kind of a fight against growing resistance. The ideological myth that these empires and that civilizations fall at their own accord is very misleading. America has reached that 240-year mark. If I go by Simone's logic, this would infer that 250 years ago, America was at a peak, and that now it has reached that point where the camel is on the horizon. So if we subtract 240 years from 2022, we land back in 1782. In terms of US history, that was not a time of peak in prosperity, in social unity, in communitarianism, in strong institutions. This was in the midst, nearing the end of the American Revolutionary War. The American War for Independence was significant, of course. However, when we compare it to other pivotal wars in American history, it doesn't compare when you look at the founding of America, when you look at American institutions and their strength, if we are going to entertain this theory. The war that was the most profound, the most deadly, and the most fatal, where there was the most to lose, was the American Civil War. The Battle of Gettysburg is the largest battle ever fought in North America. It had the largest number of casualties of the entire Civil War, and it was pivotal in later ensuing into a Union victory. Without the American Civil War and the subsequent Union victory, there may not be a United States of America as we see it today. This did not happen 240 years ago. This happened in the 1860s. And if we look at the examples of the two world wars, specifically, for instance, World War II, 2,500 US soldiers died on D-Day. This was the deadliest day in all of US history, and was also a pivotal moment in determining Allied victory. The world would be a very different place, and America would probably not be a superpower in the way that America has been seen ever since. This also did not happen 240 years ago. The Greatest Generation consisted of 18-year-old kids that stormed the beaches of Normandy. Okay, so I'm going to be a little bit nitpicky here because, well, why not at this point, I guess? The average age of Allied soldiers who stormed the beaches of Normandy were not 18, but 26. And this points to another very interesting myth that is created around wars, particularly insofar as bravery is considered. There is this sentiment, at least in this particular quote, and also I just think in history in general, that the victors of war went into war bravely, that they are heroes and that they come out as heroes. Now, just a disclaimer that this is in absolutely no way me saying that soldiers and those who fight in wars are not brave. Of course they are brave, but there are different kinds of bravery. And most cases of bravery in no way relate to this idealized Homeric bravery which is so often propagated. We can see this insofar as US opinions and public opinion about the war and America getting involved in the Second World War demonstrates. Now, I use the US as a specific example here because Simone is talking about American youth and the current generation in America. So, for understandable strategic reasons, America was never the first to be involved in the two major wars. America is isolated from the rest of Europe, is seen as the New World relative to the Old World of Europe, and it didn't affect America, geographically speaking. America is, at least strategically and in terms of warfare, in a very good position in the world. And so it is an interesting fact that America only declared war on Germany, Japan, and the other Axis powers 2 years after the rest of Europe had already been at war. Now, I'm not very pro this narrative that countries are united and unanimously in support of going to war. No country is, and America most definitely was not. Wars are oftentimes just an example of politics going awry and the upper echelons of society getting the common man to fight their battles for them, to die for them, and for their own ego boost, if we are going to be as crude as that. And I will be, because I am not a proponent of war. When the war began, that is in September 1939, when German forces invaded Poland, Americans were asked by a Gallup survey whether it looked within the next few months as if England and France might be defeated should the United States declare war on Germany and send our troops abroad. 48% said no, and 10% had no opinion, with only 42% saying yes. A month later, opinions changed dramatically, and this was after Nazi Germany had defeated and overrun Poland completely and divided it with the Soviet Union. A Gallup survey asked Americans, if it appears that Germany is defeating England and France, should the United States declare war on Germany and send our army and navy to Europe to fight? 71% said no, and only 29% said yes. Now we get into 1940, when another survey is put out to ask Americans what they thought once Germany invaded Western Europe. By then, the German army had invaded France, the Netherlands, and Belgium. Americans were asked, do you think the United States should declare war on Germany and send our army and navy abroad to fight in May of 1940? 93% said no, and only 7% said yes. And all polls taken until 1941 read the same. Public opinion wanted Americans to stay out of the war. Opinion only shifted when it was then proposed that Americans send ammunition and aid, not insofar as boots on the ground. Now, it was only at the end of 1941, when Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, that public opinion shifted dramatically. Americans were asked, should President Roosevelt have declared war on Germany as well as on Japan? 91% said yes, only 7% said no, and 3% had no opinion. I only make reference to the change in public opinion and the mood surrounding the war because I think it demonstrates the substantial difference between the metaphorical and mythological notions of bravery, which officially Mona or Simone is claiming, relative to the inherent politics that was actually at the core of troops being at Normandy. And this is the case of all wars. It is politics fought by other means. And that is ultimately the difference between historical fact and historical myth. The difference between a story and the facts which actually underlie what that story was before it got taken up by imagination. Again, this is in absolutely no way me shaming these individuals for their decisions and their choices. I actually completely understand the deserter mentality when it comes to war because I cannot even fathom how traumatic and how stressful and how absolutely grating such an experience can be if one is fortunate enough to come out alive. 50,000 American soldiers roughly deserted or are known to have that deserted. Even more British soldiers deserted, about 100,000. And you know what? Completely understandable. But in terms of creating this whole narrative of a country or an army being really united, having strong ties, being on the exact same path toward victory and salvation is not true. War is complicated and it is an absolute mess. Let's not forget that. Otherwise, we risk repeating it in the way that Simone claims not to want to. And now, 2 generations later, some kids, some 18-year-olds, want to hide in a safe room when words hurt their feelings. They want free stuff from the government because they think they are entitled to it. Let me process this for a second. I think for me what is sad about this statement is that it demonstrates in between the lines the lack of trust within modern societies. Trust between people and their leaders, trust between neighbors, trust between generations is severely lacking. And not only is this noticeably lacking, at least online, but this lack of trust is also being reinforced here by Simone, a person who is claiming to be an advocate for a better society, going forward in a cycle to a society with strong institutions, strong bonds, with trust. Surely that trust, that strengthening of social values, of social ties and institutions starts from individuals themselves, trusting their neighbors, trusting their children, even if we have absolutely no idea what they are doing. We don't create trust by belittling, ridiculing, and undermining or generalizing an entire generation of 18-year-olds composed of individuals from different ethnic backgrounds, cultural backgrounds, familial backgrounds, socioeconomic backgrounds, who have all been raised by, you guessed it, Simone's generation, millennials, who themselves are not a monolithic entity that can be generalized in such terms. This idea of this generation being entitled or wanting free stuff is not something that is generationally specific. I mean, just look at the meme and the pejorative term of a Karen, describing a woman who is of Gen X or maybe even a millennial who feels entitled within society, entitled to particular forms of customer service, her rights being the most important thing above that of public safety or what have you. And I mean, what is this free stuff? I would be very interested to hear the specifics of it. In terms of American history, human rights are an integral part of understanding that history. And in my opinion, I don't think that the language of entitlement within that context is actually a bad thing. I think the word entitlement or being entitled has regrettably been associated with negative connotations and has had latched onto it this idea that to be entitled is to be a bad person. And I think in some social situations there is definitely what you could call a modern epidemic of entitlement. But this in no way is reserved or exclusive to one generation, to one group of people. And in all honesty, every single one of us on this earth have our moments of irrational entitlement. That is life. And I'd like to end this by sort of concluding just with the sentiment of we need to create warriors, not parasites. The problem with generational theories, whether it be this theory of the camel on the horizon or the Strauss-Howe generational theory, is that it resigns us to our fate, to this idea of fate and prophecy. What is the point in fixing or doing anything about the present when the camels are on the horizon anyway? What really is the point in even trying? And I think personally, some of my misanthropic feeling about society and the world has a lot to do with this kind of language, which I inevitably pick up on social media and in the books I read. But it definitely isn't something that I want. And And it especially is not something that I want for the majority of people my age or in the world in general. We can have a few misanthropic people, you know, we can be in the minority, but we should never, and I mean never, be a majority. Because what kind of a message is that to send out to any individual, to any child, or to just any society, especially when it is founded on such misleading, such ill-informed, and such, therefore, dangerous information? History has a funny way of repeating itself, according to Simone, and it definitely does if we see history in this prophetic and metaphorical way and lens. I definitely do not think that Simone in any way is to blame for this. It is the modern history curriculums within our public and private schools today which are primarily to blame, prescribed by our modern governments, who in no way care about history as it ought to be studied. Our historical curriculums today are subservient not to historical fact, but to historical narrative and the mythology built around it. Even academics fall prey to this chronology, choosing sometimes instead to propagate an oversimplified myth. In the United Kingdom, Neil Ferguson is the most guilty party in propagating this oversimplified, very Homeric history about Britain. In the end, the British sacrificed her empire to stop the Germans, Japanese, and Italians from keeping theirs, Neil Ferguson wrote in 2002. Did not that sacrifice alone expunge all the empire's other sins? Now, we can all have different moral and ethical positions on this and on the question that Ferguson asked, but I don't want to get into that. I want to get into the historical facts, because no, the British did not factually sacrifice their empire in order to overcome and defeat Axis forces. Importantly, history is not Homer. That is Homer, not Homer Simpson. And it is in treating history like Homer that we fall prey to then repeating the harms and the tragedies of history, deluding ourselves into believing that history is in fact like Homer. So please, I implore you, whether you are a libertarian like Simone, whether you are apolitical like me, or whether you are an undeniable hottie like Joshua Craig, please be unashamedly proud of your heritage. Be unashamedly proud of your history. But never let that pride in heritage and history blind you to it. Thank you so much for watching this video, and thank you so much for your patience over my little break. I got a bit carried away with things in my personal life, so I do apologize. Please don't forget to like and to subscribe, and I'd love to hear what you think down below in the comment section. I think this is a conversation worth having, and I'd love to know where you are from, what you think about your history, your national and personal history, and I guess whether you feel pride and what sort of needs to be done surrounding theories such as this. I'd be fascinated to hear from those who believe in generational theories of history, as well as those who don't, such as myself, because I think the only way that we can get to any kind of viable consensus and any push forward is by creating trust between groups, between each other, and we can only do that by having conversations. So I look forward to reading what you have to say and responding to comments. Thank you so much to my patrons for supporting my work and supporting me, and I will see you all very, very soon in the next one. Everybody says history or herstory. What about theirstory? Theirstory. Theirstory. I like that. Somebody should start that. Somebody please start something somewhere. Theirstory. That's nice. Theirstory. Who knows? Maybe in 1,000 years they'll be calling history theirstory.